Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 8th, 2026. Today, we're going to talk about hurricane season predictions, updated hurricane season predictions, which have come out, and it's looking even more likely. Already to be expected by most, but it's looking even more likely that this hurricane season is going to be a slumper. It's going to be not very active, and even though we're only a month in, I think, given how things have played out so far, I think it's pretty obvious right now. So let's get started with the prediction from Colorado State University, uh, you know, predominantly put together by Philip Klotzbach. I think that's the best way to put it. He is the head meteorologist at CSU, and they put together their forecast. And we went over past CSU forecasts. They usually do one before the season in April, and then they update it throughout the early season in June and July. And I do believe that they will have a final forecast next month. But they released their other forecast for July, kind of taking into consideration what has happened this hurricane season so far. And they are predicting 9 named storms, 4 hurricanes, and 1 major hurricane with an ACE forecast of 50 points. All of these numbers are well below the average of 14 named storms in the Atlantic, as I think we're all pretty used to by now. 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes, which we typically see in a regular hurricane season. This year, we are pretty much going to see roughly half of that, maybe slightly more than half of that in most categories, but maybe slightly less than half, especially with the major hurricanes, and the ACE as well. Less than half of the typical average too, all to be expected given the setup that we have for this hurricane season. And in the next tweet here by Philip Klotzbach, in the tweet above, he says, the primary reason for Colorado State University's below normal Atlantic hurricane season forecast is a high likelihood of strong El Nino, which is a factor that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year. And this strong El Nino is pretty much already underway. In fact, we are on the precipice of super El Nino already. Looking at the latest daily sea surface temperature anomaly values in the Nino 3.4, which I will show you in a little bit. And then he goes on to state a pretty big piece of the puzzle here, which is why we are monitoring and we've been talking about El Nino, and that is El Nino typically decreases Atlantic hurricane activity via increases in Caribbean/tropical Atlantic vertical wind shear. And looking at the sea surface temperature anomaly map, you can see it pretty much well reflects the reasons why Colorado State University is going with a below normal hurricane season this year. First of all, and probably the most obvious thing of all, the incredible warmth in the Pacific here, with anomalies in many areas, especially right along the equator, reaching as much as 2 to even 3 degrees Celsius above normal. Already we have a pretty decent tongue of 3 degrees Celsius snaking its way from the coast of South America westward along the equator. And we even have some 4s and even some 5s in the eastern Pacific here. But pretty much the entire equatorial Pacific now, stretching all the way back to the central Pacific, has shadings of up to 2 degrees Celsius anomalies along the equator. And 2 degrees Celsius is the threshold for super El Nino, which is something that we were all expecting this year. And on the other hand, in the Atlantic, the tropical Atlantic is generally near to slightly above normal, but where you notice all of the warmth in the Atlantic right now is in the subtropics. So it's taking away energy from the deep tropics, combined with the overall background state forcing, not going to be favorable at all for the Atlantic this year, because we have really, at this point, a historically strong El Nino brewing. I think Philip Klotzbach's forecast makes perfect sense. And taking a look at the latest Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, once again, as I said, on the precipice of hitting super El Nino status. We are at 1.8 degrees Celsius right now with the latest daily update from July 7th with the latest sea surface temperature anomalies here. And this is probably going to skyrocket even further. And it's looking increasingly likely at this point that we are going to see a record-breaking El Nino event. In fact, Philip Klotzbach actually posts the latest July European forecast for the El Nino, and this is the relative Nino forecast from the European, and virtually all of the ensemble members indicate an El Nino strength above 3 degrees Celsius. With the relative El Nino forecast, you can imagine with the raw forecast, quite a few are actually even pushing 4. And all of the climate models which have come out over the last few weeks here, especially for the month of July, have all indicated at the potential increasing and looking very likely now at this point of a record strong El Nino. So this graph here, already strong, already nearing super El Nino status, yet we still have more to go. And then meanwhile in the Atlantic, things are warm, but I mean, it's absolutely going to be overwhelmed by the vastly higher amounts of heat, being stored and being concentrated in the Pacific. And it's just going to make things very unfavorable this year in the Atlantic. And right now, already reflecting that, right now in the Atlantic over the next 7 days, nothing is really expected to happen. And to be honest with you, so far this hurricane season, nothing really has happened besides a very, very weak tropical storm, Arthur. Some, even questioned whether or not it was a legitimate tropical storm. But we had a very weak tropical storm in the northern Gulf, very close to land this year, and that is about it. And nothing is expected over the next 7 days in the Atlantic. Meanwhile, though, in the Pacific, the story is much different. And this is where we are really starting to see El Nino come into full force, because things are really going to become favorable here in the Pacific, and we are probably about to enter the peak time for activity here in the Eastern Pacific, even as things, so weirdly, for the last few weeks have not been as active. But man, is that about to change, and it's already changing right now. We have 3 areas of interest, 2 of them especially, and I talked about this before, earlier on in the season, really also before the season as well. The Central Pacific as well, probably going to see a lot of activity, given the whole setup with this El Nino, and they have 2 areas of interest there, one of them actually at 60%. And then we also have another area here, just off the coast of Mexico, and there's a pretty decent shot, to be honest with you, that all 3 of these areas might form, and maybe here within the next 1 to 2 weeks we already might have, we're looking at least 3 or 4 more named storms coming here in the Pacific. So the effects of El Nino are in full force: dead Atlantic, active Pacific, and this is probably the pattern that will persist here. And to look further at how things are in the Atlantic right now, I mean, you can see why things are dead. Not a lot of convective activity happening at all throughout the deep tropics. Again, typical of El Nino atmospheric forcing. When we have all of the rising air and the MJO focused in the Pacific, it creates a deposit of sinking air in the Atlantic, and just it kills off all of the tropical waves that come off the coast of Africa, which are seedlings for development in the Atlantic. And you can see here probably a few tropical waves in the Atlantic right now. Maybe there's one near the Caribbean, one in the central Atlantic, and maybe a weak one here moving off the coast of Africa, but none of them look formidable, and there's really no area right now in the Atlantic that looks like it is trying to develop, or something is bubbling at all. And another thing, especially keeping the lid on activity here, is Saharan air, and this too is probably being enhanced by the unfavorable conditions being influenced by El Nino this year. But it's also typical in the early season, but it's just piling on top of unfavorable things that the Atlantic has for itself right now. Lots of Saharan air, and obviously this too will especially help to keep a lid on things here over the next few weeks. So the Atlantic is not looking very active, and just taking a look at the model here over the next 7 days in the Atlantic, nothing much really happens. Maybe we might get something here, with these frontal systems that will continuously move off the East Coast. We'll have a frontal boundary set up over, the midsection of the U.S., and then it'll slowly slide eastward. Maybe some energy will break off. And from time to time, the models do seem to hint at something trying to happen, but in terms of any solid signals for development, nothing. And especially anywhere throughout the deep tropics here, especially in the eastern Atlantic, absolutely no sign of activity whatsoever. And when it comes to not just activity, but in terms of moisture too, you could see over the next 7 days, as I mentioned, the Saharan air being a big issue. Well, it persists pretty much for the next week at least, probably even goes out to the next 2 weeks, just continuous streaming of dry air here from the eastern Atlantic down all throughout the deep tropics. And it's just a plague, a cap that is probably going to persist throughout the vast majority of this hurricane season and keep things very quiet, as Colorado State University is forecasting. But then meanwhile, in the Pacific, as you can see here, and as I just showed you by the National Hurricane Center, on the other hand, things are more than likely going to start getting very active. We have 2 areas here which develop in the Eastern Pacific. Both of these, I believe, are a part of current AOIs here. We have one here in the far eastern to central Pacific that develops, and then I believe this AOI here is probably this eastern area that the GFS develops, and then take this into the central Pacific. You can see here there's also quite a bit of activity as well that gets going. Maybe 1, maybe 2 systems that try to develop here. So lots of activity coming in the Pacific, and take this out over the next week. Maybe might even get our first really formidable storm of the Eastern Pacific as well. And we'll actually go more into depth about activity in the Pacific here coming up. But meanwhile, in the Atlantic, things are looking very quiet, and it is looking increasingly likely that this will be the theme. And we've been talking about it. We've been saying that this hurricane season wouldn't be as active, but it's looking even less likely now, and probably looking even more likely that this year will be a very, very quiet season. Not just slightly below normal, but maybe even very quiet. And we might not have much to talk about at all throughout the entire season, even come to the peak. Now, maybe something will still happen, but this year is definitely looking like one of those down years in the Atlantic, and definitely over the next week, nothing to write home about right now. So enjoy everything while it lasts. Enjoy your time. You know, if you're near the coastline, if you want to take a cruise to the Caribbean, looks like now is the time to do it, as there's nothing much happening in the tropics just yet, and probably will remain the case for a long time. But you never know. Something can sometimes spin up out of nowhere and catch us off by surprise, as Mother Nature always does. So we will obviously continue to be watching the tropics, but definitely as well in the Pacific too, as things will get heated here over the next few weeks. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for today's discussion. And you notice that I've been out for the last few days. I kind of needed a little bit of a break, but we're now going to start getting back into the swing of things. Going to be doing these videos pretty much on a daily basis from here on out till the end of hurricane season, even if there isn't really much of anything happening. At least in the Atlantic there won't be, but in other basins there will. So we will continue these tropical updates on a daily basis, and I hope you continue to join me. And if you want to, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and make sure to click the notification bell so you can get videos whenever I post them, the moment I upload them. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you. And I will talk to you guys again very soon.